we should also talk a bit about single player role playing games. Let's talk a bit about single player role playing games for a minute here,
Yeah, sure.
because there's a lot of I think we both are going to agree here, but RPGs don't mean like a
A
role
game where
play
you role
scene.
play. It's not an RPG does not mean a game where you role play.
And I don't know why, but when I said RPG there for a second, I just thought of like roguelikes, and that is definitely not a
No,
game
they're
you
not.
role
Yeah.
play.
I mean,
It
you
would be
could.
funny
It
as hell
depends.
to role play on it if you had like a true dungeon crawler.
There was one dungeon. There was
But
one roguelike where I kind of tried to
imagine
have
role
that.
playing on like Binding of Isaac.
Yeah.
Like, good luck,
Trauma role
man.
play.
Oh no. The Bite of
Maybe I can meet
87.
Yeah.
No, but
You
like,
know, I think it's interesting stuff like especially something like Cyberpunk, which came out recently,
yeah, I
is a
think
phenomenal game
Cyberpunk
for that.
did a lot of things.
Yeah.
On launch, and I think even now, like, it was so good and had so much opportunity. And even as a role playing game, if you weren't to follow this story, the world is built in a way that feels so good to just walk around. But the limit with single player role play experiences like that, in my opinion, is you can't really play a character, you know?
I think it depends. Some games give you the ability to like have a little bit of wiggle room with your character. Um, I think one of the best games that I've played that I actually felt like I got into my character, that was my unique character recently, was actually Outer Wilds. It was a single player game, and I'm not going to get too deep into it, but the game is entirely focused on just exploring and discovering the world.
Yeah, no, I have had Outer Wilds on my list for a while, and I
Yeah,
haven't really heard much
yeah,
about it. But like,
that's good. Don't
my
hear anything
matter
about it.
more on it is not that. It's more the matter of when you play a single player game and you try, because when we play a multiplayer role playing game, if you want to get really serious into it, you have to make a character. Like, even look at
Yeah,
5M or like GTA RP. If you want to
yeah,
get into the biggest role play community, you have to apply to join. Like, you have
yeah,
to
yeah.
write out an entire
You have to
character
apply
description.
yourself in some way.
You have to be a character. You can be yourself and you're expected to be yourself, but you can't just say, you have to explain everything about it.
You
And
have
then
to
as you
explain why
play,
you do what you do.
you as you play, you learn, well, these are the backgrounds that affect my character. And suddenly your character becomes less and less like you and more like this new character. And in a single player game, I view it way harder to do that, because let's take Skyrim, for example, or even GTA, or not GTA, Cyberpunk again.
Yeah,
When you're playing through the game, there is a storyline and there's side quests. You can't really work your way through it while avoiding all of that and carving your own journey. The only game that I've seen like this and have played a bit of, and you played this with me, and I don't know how much you're going to agree, but it was Outward, and I found that game to be incredibly like complicated, and I think you'll agree with me there. But the opportunities for late game, I feel like, are way more immersive, because it doesn't force you to really do a quest line, and you don't know, there's no markers above someone's head saying, here's the quest here or whatever. Even if there's an in-lore explanation for how that works, there's not really a compass that points you in the direct direction you need to go. It's way more like, when you start the game, it just tells you, hey, go collect, I think, 150 gold or a town favor. And so you have to talk to all the NPCs yourself and figure out who you want to help, or you have to go out in the wild, hunt a bunch of animals, go mining, whatever, die 80 times and sell all your resources till you're rich. Like,
yeah. I think that we didn't get very far in the game. At
we
least I
didn't. We
didn't.
got like an hour and a half, 2 hours in.
Maybe if that. But like I do agree that there's a lot of opportunity there, but I think that the problem with a game like that is that it doesn't play off the best things that single player games can do.
And
I think
that's
that
exactly what I'm trying to get at. Like, that game has the opportunity to do it, but because it's not multiplayer, it doesn't work. If that
Exactly.
game was fully multiplayer, it would be amazing. But
Yeah,
because it's only 2 player, it doesn't work. It wants to
I
be a
agree.
single player role playing game. And those
It wants to be a
games,
single player MMO, I think.
yeah, yeah. And those games don't really work out that well. I'm going to be honest. I've played a lot of those single player MMO type games, but like they don't work out. They're not that fun in the end because they're just too complicated for something that there is no like background. I can Google how to do things, but I can't walk up to someone and just be like, "Hey, how do I do this?" And there's no big
There's no sense
descriptions
of
of things.
like community, and it's much more difficult, and it's a harder barrier of like being invited by friends. And I think that's another
Mhm.
thing that like role play is almost always people get into it because they're invited by somebody else who is
Mhm.
already
And
into
that's the
it.
same with tabletop as well,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I agree. Like because they're such complicated things generally that you kind of have to have somebody guide you along your first time getting into something,
Mhm.
who braved the path on their own or was invited by somebody else on their own. Um, it's when you try to do that in a single player game without there being an easy way for somebody to guide. And yes, that game does have multiplayer, but it's very limiting.
It is a
Um,
very limited one.
yeah, it might as well be like Lego multiplayer. Um,
Yeah, it works for what it wants to do, but it isn't the best at anything it does. I'm going to
yeah,
be honest. I
it's
don't
definitely
get me
interesting
wrong.
though.
Yeah, for the time we played, I enjoyed it, but
Yeah,
I enjoyed it because of what it could be, not really the gameplay per se. I enjoyed it because of how much freedom it felt like I had in a game with its own set of rules. It felt
yeah,
like I was kind of walking into this world. I'm going to be honest, it felt like a fucking isekai. Let's be real.
a
Because
little
it
bit.
felt like I was walking in as a character because there was like no character development. So you have to basically play as yourself. There was no like character design. Actually, we'll talk about that next. But like you couldn't really play as your own unique character as much as you just play as, hey, I'm myself. I am going to walk through this game and do everything that I want to do that I find interesting. This character looks interesting. Let's talk to them instead of this one. So it felt like an isekai. And the wonder and amazement of isekais is it's like, what is there to do in this world? Like, what
Yeah.
can I do here?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. It's the curiosity that like it's kind of like I think part of it in the concept of isekais is like bringing back that
Hmm.
childhood wonder of like what are the limitations of the world when you're trying to figure out what the world around you is, and
I
that kind
guess
of what
that's the
comes
best
back.
example of what a single player role playing experience is. It's just that type of isekai. Like
Yeah,
exactly what you're saying there.
yeah. I agree. I agree. Because like especially if the character in the game is remotely similar to how you would act personally, it still lets you get into character, but you're not getting into character of a character that you made. You're getting into character of a character that the game creators made.
Hmm.
Which it's interesting. I think another one that I found that I had a similar experience with that is Red Dead 2. I
Mm.
got a lot into character. Not that I necessarily would make a character like Arthur Morgan, but like it is an easy character to get into.
Hmm. I can understand that. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Like, I don't know. Single player role playing experiences, I feel like just don't have the same development.
The way
And
I put it is that they're just different. In the same
yeah,
way that like single player experiences and
if you want to get into the
multiplayer.
role play we're talking about, you have to first do multiplayer because we're talking about a very specific type of role play. Let's be real here. End of the day, anyone could go and like there's going to be people who disagree with us on it's harder to role play in single player, but it's our specific type of role play that we're talking about here. It's not like it's the role play where everyone that you talk to has their own background, their own story. like because everyone isn't an NPC.
Yeah, and that kind of goes
It's
back to what I
going
was
to
saying
be
a
different
while.
no matter what you do.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying going back a while ago to character-driven roleplay. When you do something like Star Wars RP or like the Roblox RP that I've been doing, every person you talked to is a developed character, and every person you interact with has is a actual dude, an actual
Hmm.
person. Um, so it's not like you can predict them. I think another interesting way, like a comparison, is like fighting games. If you fight an
Mm.
AI in fighting games, you can get good at figuring out that AI's weakness because it will always have that weakness until the game gets updated. But when you're fighting a person, that person will learn like that you're gonna try to
Hmm.
exploit that weakness, and they will avoid letting you exploit that weakness. And I think that's kind of the difference. In single player games, you have to be a directly willing participant and willfully not let yourself abuse the AI. But in multiplayer games, there's no AI to abuse. There are people, and they won't let themselves be abused.
I think the first time you ever play through a single player game is the best time you're going to have with it. Because the
I
second
agree.
time you play through it, if you're trying to play as a character, you're not going to be able to do it.
Yeah, I
Because
agree.
end of the day, it's just, hey, I know how to do this. I've been here a million times. Like, if I wanted to go back and play Fallout 4 and role play as, like, I don't know, CT9981 Craig, like, I'm just not going to be able to do it. I
Yeah,
know who the Minutemen are. I know how to get to the railroad before you do anything. I know where I need to skip. I know I don't want to talk to this guy for 3 hours. Like, it's all of that.
yeah,
And I
yeah. No,
think
I agree.
that's where MMOs actually work out because, like, an MMO is just constantly updating compared to a single player game like that. An MMO is basically just like the peak form you can get for single player roleplay, in my opinion. If you want, like, there's two different forms of roleplay in an MMO. There's not talking to anyone and going through the storylines and talking to NPCs, because every NPC will give you a different quest and is like a novel's worth of text. But then there's the multiplayer side of things, which is just something we've already talked about and like more of what we're doing. It's just text based roleplay that we're so used to, right? Kind of get what
Yeah,
I'm meaning at there?
yeah. No, I definitely get where you're coming from. Like, I think that it's just that the MMOs have so many different paths and so much extra
Yeah.
stuff that there's always going to be more stuff to experience for the
There's
first time.
always going
I
to
think
be that
that's
new
that's
first
the big thing with
experience.
roleplay is that roleplay only works when it's the first time you're experiencing it. So stuff
Hmm.
like tabletop or like Gmod or Roblox, it works because you are still experiencing it for the first time because it's new variations of stuff that you might have done stuff that's similar to. But with single player games, once you've beaten the game, unless that game has significant variation in its paths, um, you've done it before. You know what the
What the
case
fuck?
is. You good?
Yeah, a ladybug just landed on my neck. I like swatted at it and I'm like, what the fuck? It's January, my guy.
Yeah, you were supposed to be sleeping. Good night.
I'm gonna put it over here. Okay. But yeah, continue what you were saying.
Yeah, I was mostly done. Basically just roleplay has to be a first time experience. It can't be something that you've done before, otherwise you're not role playing, you're just going through the motions.
Yeah. And that's why MMOs work for what it is, and I've already stated this, but it's just new.
Yeah.
Moving on.